Hi, I'm going to keep my notes just in case. Let me start by asking you a question. When you hear the words impossible, that's impossible, can't be done, never been done before, what do you think it means? When you say that to someone, what does it mean? Does it mean it's something that hasn't been physically done before? Does it mean you've never seen it done before? Or perhaps does it mean you've never done it before? And I'm really curious about the answer because each of those mean very different things. I've spent the last 2 decades of my career working in the most regulated, complex, intense environments across banking, payments, financial technology, for a large part of my career in Fortune 200 companies, and then over the last 5 years in the private equity space. And I've learned a few things about human behavior. Every time I walked into rooms where teams would say, we've tried everything, we don't have the right people, we don't have the right product, the market timing isn't right. Every single time when you peeled back the layers, what became very clear was that they were at the edge of their thinking. They were at the limits of their imagination. And what they were really saying is, we have done everything we know how to do. And the moment humans experience limits, constraints, something interesting happens in our bodies. You know that feeling. Your breathing gets shallow, your chest tightens, some weird stuff starts happening in your gut. And that's exactly what I was noticing in the companies that I ended up walking into. My life, my career, and for those of you in the audience who know me personally, will say a large part of my identity has centered around fixing things. And so, over the years, I became the person organizations recruited to come fix things. If the revenue engine was stuck, if sales were stalled, I was brought in to help teams, CEOs, and boards get unstuck. And every single time, what I uncovered was that under limits, under constraints, humans panicked. And what they did is they would often retreat into safety. We look for something safe, we look for something steady to ground ourselves, or we would run through this with force and acceleration. What we didn't do often enough was pause. What I saw even less was companies and people who would pause and question, pause and examine, pause and test. Now, I am all too familiar with that pattern. Growing up in India in the 90s as a young girl, it became very clear to me that certain decisions were going to be made about my life, my career, my life partner, that didn't always have my best interests at heart. And so, what did I do? In that moment of fear, constraints, limitations, if I saw a wall in front of me, I became the idiot who ran into the wall head first. And by middle school, I had a nickname. I was called the bulldozer. And looking back, it was probably not a compliment. In fact, it was rarely a compliment. But force was my identity, effort was my life strategy. And I learned to believe that all I had to do in life was to push harder, outwork everybody else, and endure the pain and suffering that was inevitable on this journey I had chosen. And to be honest, I had the results to back it up. That is how I skipped 2 grades in school. I was a good Indian girl. That is how I became captain of our national elocution and debate team and took it to nationals 3 years in a row. That is how I became head girl. And for those of you who didn't go to school in India, that's essentially the female head of the student council. For years, I believed that force was my secret weapon. In hindsight, I don't think I gave myself enough credit. But what I realized, looking back, was that force was part of the reason for the biggest breakthroughs in my life. But more than force, what I had started to do was pause, test, question, and examine these limitations. Until one day, about a year ago, when the bulldozer stopped working cold. In April of 2025, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And in that moment, the primal fear of constraints, of limitations, the handy-dandy bulldozer showed up. And so what did I do? I read, I researched. I was able to quote medication protocols. I knew the results of clinical trials better than the medical staff at Memorial Sloan Kettering treating my husband. In fact, my husband's oncologist, not so jokingly, would refer to me as the 9th member of his 8-member medical team. I got the message. Sitting in those hallways, hospital hallways, I had a realization. Impossible in this case wasn't a metaphor. This was real. This was a loved one's health crisis. And in that moment, I had reverted to what my primal child had known how to do to survive, which is call upon force, call upon the bulldozer. But I was now dealing with a life crisis that was fluorescent lights, waiting rooms, and numbers on screens that didn't respond to love, prayer, hope, or force. In October of 2025, after months of multiple rounds of high-dose chemotherapy, a failed stem cell transplant, and the night after surgery where we had been told he had a 5% chance of success, I remember absolutely devastated and crushed because the wall in front of me refused to give way. And in that emotional rubble, something miraculously emerged. A memory of my childhood, a memory of me being 19 years old. So let me take you back there. So as I said, I grew up in India. I grew up in Bombay. I will still call it Bombay. And I grew up in an incredibly loving, but ultra-Orthodox, incredibly conservative Sikh household. The beauty of that household was that it was surrounded by love, but it had expectation, and it had structure. It also had a life that had been planned for me, an arranged marriage at 20 to a nice Sikh boy, Sikhism being our religious community. And so as soon as I turned 19, my good parents did what any parents in India would do. They started shopping me around to prospective suitors, and they put together a biodata. For those of you who haven't been through an experience, a biodata is really your resume with a beautiful headshot. And so suitors arrived. Well-meaning friends, relatives, neighbors, aunties and uncles in our apartment building, religious priests, acquaintances from America, everybody had someone they thought I could and should marry. I remember one late Sunday afternoon sitting in my grandparents' home on a cold tiled floor with my cousins, eavesdropping on this very heated conversation happening with my relatives who were talking about the pros and cons of the various suitors. Something defiant came over me. I walked into the living room and boldly blurted out, I didn't want to get married. I didn't want an arranged marriage. Yes, I did want to go to America, but I wanted to go alone, and I wanted to go to study. I didn't want a husband, not yet. My father looked at me, and in the most loving voice that he could find at that moment, he said, that's impossible, Sona. No one has ever done that. Good girls don't do that. That's impossible, Beti. Go back and study. As I reflected on that moment, you can guess who showed up, my handy-dandy bulldozer. So what did the 19-year-old bulldozer do? She found a way to apply to graduate school in California. She boarded a plane with $240 in her pocket, a $10,000 bank loan, and I made my way to a country I had never been before. Was I terrified? I was mortally afraid of what I was about to do. But what I was even more afraid of was shrinking into someone else's reality, shrinking into someone else's definition of what was possible for me. Over the next 20 years, I built a career where I essentially took those beliefs. I was met with impossible situations. I would pause, I would question, I would examine, and I would test those limits. And I became the person that companies recruited to help them turn things around. However, sitting in that hospital room last fall, I had forgotten. I had used questioning in my business life. I had used it in my career. But when faced with such a tremendous potential loss, I had reverted back to sheer force. Sitting in that hospital hallway, I had my light bulb moment that I needed to go back to know what I knew best how to do. Now, here's why this matters. This matters because every time we accept someone else's definition of impossible, every time we accept what somebody else says we can do, something in us shrinks. Lives shrink, imaginations shrink, careers shrink, and very soon companies and performance shrinks. However, here's my invitation to you. Settle into your seats, take a deep breath, and think of a situation in your lives right now that feels seemingly impossible. Maybe it's an internship you've applied for. Maybe it's a job opportunity that you are considering. Maybe it's an outreach or a DM to someone you like or someone you want to work for, right? Think of that scenario and notice what happens in your body. If you are humans, like most of us, you may start feeling a sense of tightness. You may start feeling something weird happening in your gut. You may also start hearing a little voice that starts to say, "Who do you think you are? You've never done this before. You don't know anyone who's done this before." That voice could be inherited. It could be something you've heard your parents say, your community, your religious institutions, friends. It could also be your voice. And so here's my invitation to you for the next few days. Think of that impossible scenario. Sit with that discomfort. Don't act, just pause. And question it. Challenge that limit. Is it a real limit? Is it an inherited belief? Is it real? Have you seen anyone else do it? Challenge your limit. Challenge that constraint. And then I invite you to examine it. Get curious about alternatives. Has someone else done this before? Is there someone who could help you do this? Maybe you haven't done it before, but you have been successful in the past. Tap into some of that curiosity and examine those beliefs and that internal voice that you may hear yourself saying. And last, test it. Give yourself 7 days to do something different. Now, I'm not asking you to blow up your world. I'm not asking you to have a nervous breakdown. But what I am asking you to do is once you've examined, once you've questioned those limits, test it. Have the uncomfortable conversation. Reach out to that one person and wait 7 days before you decide. Here's what I've learned in my life and my career, and working with over 700 teams and collaborating with over 10,000 colleagues. Most of the limits we believe are limits in our lives are not real. When we say something is impossible, we are rarely naming a fact. What we are naming is a limit in someone else's thinking. What we are saying is we've tried everything we know how to do. Most of the walls in our lives are built from repetition, inherited beliefs, repeated thoughts that somehow become identity, that somehow become your constraints. Now, I'm the first one to say that reimagining impossible doesn't really mean being naive enough to say that anything is possible. But what I am asking you to do is the next time you are faced with something seemingly impossible, get really close to the wall, stand long enough, look closely enough, and more often than not, you will start to see the shape of something appear in that wall. You might see the faint outline of a door that has been cleverly hidden, a door that is waiting for someone curious enough to notice it, a door that is waiting for someone brave enough to open it, and a door that is waiting for someone humble enough to step through it into possibility. Thank you.